Hi students, today we'll be looking at the topic on excretion and the kidneys itself. So again, we'll be dividing it up into three different areas or three different subtopics because it has got a rather long amount of information to intake. So firstly, the first one is the longest. We will be looking at excretion. Okay, excretion doesn't just involve the kidneys. So briefly, we'll look at some other areas that excretion is involved in. The urinary system as well as the kidney structure. After that, we'll move on to homeostasis by the kidneys, and the homeostasis process carried out by the kidneys is called osmoregulation, and this is carried out by a specific hormone called the antidiuretic hormone, or in short, ADH. Last but not least, we'll look at how the dialysis machine is functioning in people who have loss of kidney function and is not able to remove waste products as efficiently. Right, let's get started. So for excretion, excretion is not just the removal of urea or urine from the kidneys, it's the removal of any waste products that is produced by the body. So we have not just the kidneys as the excretory organs, or rather the organs that excrete substances. It can also be other organs, mainly the skin, the lungs, and the liver. Okay, the skin, we know that it removes water, mineral salts, and a very small amount of urea. So that's why it is one of the main excretory organs. In fact, the skin is the largest one of the largest organ in the body and is considered to be an organ. So any toxicity of the body long term will show up on the skin. Okay, now the lungs remove the carbon dioxide and water. Liver is to remove the bile pigments, that is the remnants or the production during the bile process. Okay, so just take note there are four and not just one of the kidneys, which is a common mistake made by students on excretion. Now moving on to the second part on the urinary system. Okay, so you can see this one here. This is my urinary bladder. So the bladder holds the urine, but where does the urine component come from? Okay, we have the two sets of kidneys, one on the right side, one on the left side. Okay, so the right side of the kidney and the left side of the kidney, both of them have the arteries and the veins. So renal means kidney, artery means it is carrying oxygenated blood from the heart. A is away from the heart, so it goes away from the heart towards the various organs, bringing oxygenated blood, oxygen, etc. And the vein itself will remove the waste products that it collects away from the kidneys. Okay, and also the deoxygenated blood, etc. So once you have got the urea and water production from the kidneys, both the kidneys have this structure called the ureter. Okay, so just take note, the spelling structures for is very similar to each other. So ureter carries the urine from the kidneys itself into the bladder. Okay, so because by right the kidneys, they are a sterile structure, meaning to say that there should be no bacteria or virus involvement in the kidneys. So therefore, whatever urine that is being collected through the ureter into the urinary bladder is a sterile form of urine. Okay, so once the urinary bladder is full, what happens is that there will be signals sent to the brain and some contractions of it, which signals the person the urge to urinate. So the urinary bladder itself will then empty out into the surroundings through the urethra. Okay, so ureter exists in both males and females, same likewise to the urethra as well, because it is required for normal processing of biological processes. Okay, now let's move down to the kidney component here. Okay, so the kidney structure here, as you can see, when you cut the kidney up into half, you have the upper layer here and you have got the bottom part of the layer here. Okay, so the upper part of the region here, this is my cortex area. Okay, and the lower part here, this one, the more triangular shape, this is my medulla region. Okay, so the medulla region itself, you will see that it has got a lot of these structures which are called the pyramids. Okay, so these pyramids, they open up into a space which is called the renal pelvis here. Okay, so all of this here, this part here, this structure, the nephrons, are the basic units of the kidney. So over here, it is just illustrated to have two. Okay, you only have one set here and one set here, so there's only two nephrons here. But in actual reality fact, we have got thousands of nephrons all surrounding within the kidney itself. So the water components, nitrogenous waste, whatsoever will travel through the structure itself, and the water will be collected, passing through here, excess water, etc. And from the pyramid itself, it empties out into this region, which is called the renal pelvis. Okay, renal pelvis will then connect to the ureter here. So from here, this one will then go to the ureter, and from the ureter, as we saw earlier on, it will be connected to the bladder. Okay, so here, just recap, you have got cortex and medulla. Cortex at the top, medulla here, renal pelvis here, which opens up into this region, and the renal pelvis will then connect to the ureter, which will then be connected to the bladder itself, urinary bladder. Now, each of these basic units of the kidneys is what we call nephrons. So when we look at the nephrons deeper into this area here, you realize that you have got a few different components. Okay, so we have got the afferent arteriole, and we have got the efferent arteriole here. Okay, so if you take note of the size difference here, the afferent arteriole is a larger diameter compared to the efferent arteriole. So the diameter shape makes a very specific role or process called ultrafiltration, which we will look at later. Okay, so the top part of the nephron lies in the cortex part region of the kidney, and the lower portion lies in the medulla part. Collecting tubes will then collect into the renal pelvis, which will then enter into the ureter. Alright, so over here, the blood that is coming in from the renal artery will push through the afferent arterioles. So over here, I have got extremely high pressure that is coming in. Okay, so very high blood pressure because the blood is directly from the heart to the renal artery. Extremely high blood pressure here as compared to the efferent arteriole. So we have got two different sets of blood pressure, which causes what we call a hydrostatic blood pressure. So this hydrostatic blood pressure causes the next sort of event, whereby when it goes in at extremely high pressure here, which pushes only very small substances through the glomerulus basement here into the Bowman's capsule. Okay, so we have got the glomerulus here. The basement of it, the bottom, I have got extremely tiny pores which only allow very small substances such as your glucose, nitrogenous waste, urea, some amino acids, etc. to pass through. The larger substances like plasma protein, white blood cells, they won't be able to pass through as well. So only the small substances will be forced through due to the hydrostatic pressure that is coming in from the renal artery and into the afferent arteriole. Okay, so once the ultrafiltration takes place, it will be collected over here. This is your Bowman's capsule, or another term for it is your renal capsule. Okay, so renal capsule or Bowman capsule along with the glomerulus, which is here, is your corpuscle. So from the Bowman's capsule, it will enter into the first convoluted loop. Okay, so since this structure is very convoluted and it is the first one, we call it the proximal convoluted tube. Okay, so from here you have got selective reabsorption. Okay, so absorption of most water, glucose, salts will all take place at the proximal convoluted tubule. And from here, the remaining substances will then continue to travel downwards. And this going down is because it's going down, it's called the descending, and this is the ascending. Collectively, they are called the loop of Henle. Okay, so I repeat, this is going down. So this is my descending loop of Henle. This is my ascending loop of Henle, in which I have got some reabsorption of water and mineral salts. Okay, and from here, it will go to the next structure here. You can see that it is convoluted also, but this is slightly further from the glomerulus. So we call this the distal convoluted tubule, or DCT for short. Okay, so whatever substances that is not required, your nitrogenous waste will now be more or less here, and then it will enter into the collecting tubule. So when we have got hundreds of these structures and hundreds, thousands of these different collecting tubule, they will all enter into what we saw earlier on, the renal pelvis here. Okay, so all these will enter into the renal pelvis, and from the renal pelvis, it will then enter into the ureter and into the urinary bladder for temporary storage. All right. So the second convoluted tubule, or the distal convoluted tubule, is also the region where the hormone acts on. Okay, the antidiuretic hormone, which osmoregulates or regulate the amount of water that is either reabsorbed into the body on a very hot or dehydrated person, or is released out during a cold day or in a person who is extremely hydrated. It all acts on here and a little bit on the collecting tubule as well. All right, so now you can see another thing. You can see all these blood capillaries which surrounds the entire nephron itself. So in actual fact, there's a lot more capillaries. This is just for illustration. So all these capillaries surround the nephrons tightly, but not extremely tight, to aid the reabsorption of substances back up into all these capillaries. Okay, so for example here, whatever that is reabsorbed from the PCT enters into all these capillaries that surrounds it. Capillaries will then merge back together and it will enter the venule here. Okay, and then from the venule, it will then enter into the renal vein and it will be brought away from the kidneys. All right, so let's move down a little bit so we can see over here. So like just now, the renal artery will have extremely high blood pressure, forces the blood into the efferent arteriole, into the glomerulus, okay, subsequently into the efferent arteriole. All right, now the direction of the filtrate is whatever substances that are being collected in the Bowman's capsule will enter into the PCT proximal, both the descending and ascending loop of Henle, the DCT, okay, collecting tube or collecting duct, renal pelvis, ureter, temporarily stored in the urinary bladder and excreted out as urine through the urethra. Okay, so we will look more deeper into the processes that we mentioned just now, ultrafiltration as well as hydrostatic pressure. Okay, so ultrafiltration is made possible because you have got high blood pressure at the efferent arteriole. At the same time, the efferent arteriole, you have got a larger diameter compared to the efferent arteriole. Okay, so due to the high blood pressure along with the diameter difference, it creates a very high pressure. And this pressure is what we call hydrostatic pressure. So you can see over here, the efferent arteriole is larger in diameter than the efferent. So very high blood pressure here forces the substances through the glomerulus basement, which is only 1 cell thick, into the Bowman's capsule. Okay, so this high hydrostatic pressure causes the ultrafiltration. Okay, because the basement is so thin and the pores are so narrow, it is not just simply filtration, but ultrafiltration of the substances from this region, the glomerulus, into the Bowman's capsule here. Okay, so the only 1 cell thick, so only specific substances like glucose, amino acids, and it's not all amino acids, specific amino acids, mineral salts, etc. to pass through. Red blood cells, though, even though they are small, but imagine the size is only 1 cell thick, so therefore red blood cells are considered large in comparison, and therefore they are not able to pass through, not even platelets. Okay, so all these will be recollected back. Whatever that does not pass through the glomerulus basement is efficiently and quickly gathered into the efferent arteriole and brought out back into the renal vein. Whatever that is passed through, then it becomes what is known as the glomerulus filtrate. So similar to chemistry, we have got whatever substances that are being filtered, the liquid version is the filtrate itself. And because it came from the glomerulus, that will be known as the glomerular filtrate. Okay, so some of the substances that are reabsorbed, so majority of it is reabsorbed at the proximal convoluted tubule. So this happens by simple diffusion and active transport. Okay, so most of the substances, glucose, amino acids, mineral salts, these are reabsorbed. Okay, water reabsorption is by osmosis. Okay, loop of Henle, both the ascending and descending, we have got some water reabsorption. Okay, So now when it reaches the distal convoluted tubule, that is when the antidiuretic hormone plays a tremendous role, because the convoluted tubule, they can increase or decrease the permeability, how large the opening of the blood vessels or the capillaries can get for reabsorption. And that is controlled by the ADH hormone, which we will look at next. Of course, things like urea waste products, they are not reabsorbed, and together with whatever water that is not reabsorbed, it will be released out into the urinary bladder itself to be released to the environment. Alright, so the next part we'll be looking at osmoregulation and how ADH affects along with the homeostasis. Thank you.